Okay, so we're gonna go over how to do the drawing where you use words to do all the shading. Okay, so again, it's okay to sketch things out with with pencil, with graphite. Okay, and remember, I just want you to find, like I say 4 to 5. I only put 3 in here just because I'm doing it for the demo. And I'm working actually on a much smaller paper because that's kind of what fits within the frame of my camera here on my little setup. But again, find 4 to 5 objects. Just find simple things. Like I just kind of drew a vase and then a little box and a sphere. Find things that don't have a really complex shape because they'll make the shading part a lot easier for you, and then just drawing the shape in general. And then too, if you can find objects that are white, gray, or black, those are better. Color's okay. You might not go with something that has really strong color if you do choose color objects. And then, again, just objects that reflect the light really well. So something like a stuffed animal that's got really furry, material on it, that might work as well. You want something more that's like a smoother, even surface on it. So like your hydro flask or coffee cups, coffee mugs are always good. Things like that, okay? And again, you can sketch out the objects. I'm not gonna really go over how to draw the objects. So if you've really never drawn before, just do your best, okay? Really what I want you to focus more is on capturing the different values, the different lights and darks in there, okay? And you can see I did outline things here, right? I got out my own way. I sort of use these little ellipses and, for cylinders, and then the boxes, I just try to kind of match the angles that I'm seeing and those kinds of things. But anyway, so I sketched it out with pencil. And that's okay. I remember yours needs to be about 14 by 17 or larger. And again, I'm doing something smaller just because I can do that for the demo. Okay, so things you want to think about. So I'm just going to grab some, I have microns. You might have the Faber-Castell pens, which is fine. So I'm going to get the microns. I'm just going to use a scratch piece of paper here. So things to think about, like this is an 01 pen. Okay, so it's a little bit of a thinner tip. And so you can see when I make my lines, I'm just kind of scribbling out some lines for right now. Really thin tip pen, like here's a really tiny one. So like a 003, there you go. Okay, so this is gonna put really thin lines down. Like I probably wouldn't go with something this thin, but again, just to show you what the different pins do, that's what it does. And then in terms of the actual pins, not the markers, but the actual pins. This is 08 on the micron, and if you have the Faber-Castells, I think the M has like an M on it. That's probably the one that's equivalent to this one. Anyway, so you can tell that obviously thicker lines will make things look darker. Okay. Let me grab one of the marker tips here, which that is not it. I'll look for one here in a second. Anyways, if you're using a marker pen, just a marker, obviously that's going to give you a thicker mark. So I've got some right here. And actually here, this is one. It looks like a pen, but it's actually more of a marker tip. So obviously that looks darker too. Okay. So, thicker lines will make things look darker. Thinner lines will make things look lighter. Okay. I'll go back to one of the ones I started with, the 01, which was the one that made those lines. Okay, you can see, made those lines. So if you put your lines really close together, or your marks or whatever they are, they could be little squiggles. In our case, we're going to use words, like I'll be drawing a vase, so I'm going to use the word vase. When I do the box, I'll be drawing, doing the word box. So the closer you put your marks together, Okay, and even especially if you obviously like overlap them, it's going to look darker. The further apart you put them, it's going to look lighter. Okay, so it has to do, getting different values. A couple of things that will make it happen for you is, the thickness of the mark, like the size of it, and then of course the density, closer together versus further apart. And that's how you can control how dark or how light something looks. Okay, and there is, like, if I, especially with the pens, if I draw my line a little slower, it gives it more time for the ink to flow out of the tip of the pen. And so of course it's going to look a little darker. If I draw my line a little quicker, okay, then the ink's going to flow out slower, and then it's going to look a little bit lighter. Okay, you can't really use pressure like say with pencil. If I don't push down very hard, it's going to look lighter. If I push down a lot harder, it's going to look darker. Okay. You can't really use pressure with ink so much because you end up kind of trashing the pens, and it really doesn't make that much of a difference. Okay, so there's a little bit of that, but you just got to be careful. You don't want to trash the tips of the pens, because then you spend a bunch of money on pens and they don't really work very well for you. So the speed that you draw the lines or the marks, the density, and then of course the thickness of the writing utensil, whether it's a marker or a thicker pen or a thinner pen. All right, and so I'm just going to fill this in a little bit and get my paper out of the way here. And you can start with kind of whatever you want. I would start with something a little bit thinner, so maybe it doesn't have to be like I have the 001. I don't have to start that thin, but I could use like a 02, something that's more like in the middle. You don't want the thickest pen you got, but you don't want the thinnest one either. Okay, so I sort of sketched this out to look a little bit like a bulb. So pretend this is the light, okay? Like there's a spotlight, it's beaming out. And as I said, when you arrange your object on the table, what I would do is turn off all the lights, and then if you can't, if you can, bring a lamp over or some kind of spotlight and put it next to the objects. And then, if you have that, you can turn the lights off. If not, just use the natural light in the room. But if you can bring up like one light source and have all the other lights off, especially if you're drawing, more towards nighttime, it'll make the lighting a little more dramatic, and it actually, I think, is easier to draw. Okay, so again, I sketched it out. I got to do the rest in pen. So I'm going to use a 02 here. Again, to me, it's kind of in the middle. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill in, start filling in these objects. And so again, you're going to use words, and you're just going to keep rewriting the word. And don't worry, you'll be like everybody else or forget how to spell, because your left and right brain will get mixed up. And you can use whatever words you want to. You could use the same word for the entire thing. I'll probably use vase, I'll use box, and I'll use sphere. Okay, maybe like shadow when the shadow's down here. But okay, so let's just say like down here where the shadow's cast, it's going to be a little bit darker, and even here it will be darker. This will be a little bit lighter, and of course a lot lighter. So if I start writing the word box, and I don't care if you write it all in capital letters, lowercase, doesn't matter to me. Okay. So if I'm trying to make this look darker, then I could and I could just do kind of a layer to start this. So you can tell I'm going to start forgetting how to spell here as well. Okay, so if I write it like really big like this, see how the spacing is a little bit different. That's not really good, very good B, but that's okay. But the spacing is different, so this looks a little bit lighter than it does up here. Okay, so how can I fix that? Well, I can, if I really want to, I can just do this and draw over it. Okay. So again, it's okay to keep layering. What I could do is, again, put it really, let's say down here, I want this cast shadow, or like right up against the box, to be really dark. So I'll just use the word box. I said I was going to use shadow, but we'll just use the same word. See, if I draw a little closer together, almost like you're writing the word really small, but you know, you're putting them really close together. Again, that's another way. Again, like here, if I just keep rewriting the word, and like I said, don't worry, you'll watch me misspell something here in a second. So if I keep layering, and I don't care if you change directions, that's fine. You can write at angles, you can, you know, whatever it needs to be. And so on and so on. So I would just keep filling this in. So if I really want it to keep looking darker, I just keep going over and over it, okay? Or like I said, like down here, I can, you know, I can really squeeze these words in like super tight. And so the way I'm doing this one right now, it doesn't really matter what size pen I'm using because I'm more relying on the density. Okay, but let's say I get tired of having to write the word so many times. And let's say the rest of this, or just, you know, even that whole shadow, if I had to approach this from the beginning, let's say I want this to be like really dark. Okay, I'll just break out my, and I'll break out my marker. And I can do the same thing. I can put it really close together. I could space them apart more, but see what I mean? Like it starts looking dark a lot quicker. Because again, I'm using, you know, something that gives me, you know, thicker marks. And this is that 0.8 that I have. Like I said, I think the, if you have Faber-Castells, it's the pen is labeled as like an M. That it's the same thing as this one. So you can see the lines aren't quite as thick as it was with the marker, but still you get the point. So yeah, using, or if you haven't have like a brush tip pen, that'll work too. I don't know if I exactly have a regular brush tip. Actually, do you have this one? So this one wasn't in your kit, but it is a brush pen ink cartridge. Like the ink will flow into here, and then it's just like a synthetic brush, and it'll flow down to there. And so if you're not used to the brush tip, it could feel a little awkward because it does feel like you're writing with a brush. So that, you know, that one can take a little practice getting used to. And so, okay, so actually let me go back to, and I'll actually maybe grab a 0.1. I think I have it in my hand. Here it is. So up here where it's light, you know, and be careful about this when you're drawing the objects. Remember that even though something's kind of light, you don't want it to be like pure white. You don't want it to look pure white. There's only a few areas on an object that are pure white, like where the light really bounces off and it looks like super white hot. Those are the areas that are pure white. And same thing with the shadows. You don't want to, like here, even though the shadow, it's a shadow, I don't want to just fill it in pitch black. I have to look at it and, you know, think about it as being, you know, is it like 100% black? Well, probably not. Is it 90 or 80? Okay, it's 90 or 80 probably. And then that's how you try to, you know, build up the density or the thickness of the lines to represent that. So up here, it's going to probably be more of like, you know, in a couple spots it might be 0, but overall it's probably more like a 10 or a 20% gray. So it's really light. And so again, if I use a really thin pen, and I might have overshot this a bit, you know, but I mean, again, I can, let's retry it over here with a vase. So again, see, I can really space things apart, or again, writing the word bigger and then letting the letters be thinner and spacing them apart more will look lighter. Of course, if you write the words really small and put the letters really close and dense together, it's going to look darker. But that's how you can regulate this, okay? And so the idea is you do want to fill in all the objects. You want to show all the shadows, the full value. Okay, the light grays, the middle grays, the dark grays. Look at the examples I put online on Canvas, right? I have a couple finished examples that students have done from previous semesters. And that's what you're going for. And again, there really shouldn't be a lot of like empty white space, and there shouldn't be like pitch black space. Anytime you look at anything, you're going to realize that more of your values are between 10% gray and 90% gray. Okay, there's not a whole lot of zeros or 100%. And so, again, and I'm just sort of making this one up right now. I'm not going to like really try to fine tune it, because the demo would be like 3 hours. So I'm not going to get very far, but you'll see I'm just kind of approaching this to start. Like I said, if you misspell it a few times here and there, it's okay. We want to concern ourselves more with trying to replicate the values than your spelling on this particular assignment. Okay. And why do I have you using the words? Well, it kind of forces you to focus on the things that I'm talking about. Well, line thickness, the density, again, like the speed that you draw it, but it gets you to focus more on the actual line, marks, and layering, instead of trying to like shade or just scribble. Okay, so it's kind of a weird technique and can feel a little tedious at first, but once you get used to it, it's actually kind of fun. And it just sort of forces you to, again, focus on just a couple of different techniques of how to show value, because you have to keep rewriting the words. And so you don't have, you have to kind of think about it a little more as you're applying your marks. And you can tell I'm still kind of sketching this all with one pen. And again, you can do that whole thing with one pen if you want to. I would switch it up. If something's really dark, break out your marker or your thicker pen. If something's really light, like it's got over here, there'll be a lot of bright light, then I am going to have to, like really draw, thin lines. And I know this probably looks a little darker than it should, but as I start filling everything else in, so that's one thing too you can do is that, like if you're drawing something and it looks a little bit too dark, as you start darkening all the mid values and the darker values, that'll look lighter in comparison. It's that thing I talked about in the lecture of simultaneous contrast, that what's around it will affect how it looks. So if you start darkening things in up around something that you at first you're like, oh, I drew that way too dark, darken the stuff around it, and you're going to realize it. Sorry, there's my Homer Simpson clock again. As you're, like I said, draw something in a little bit, you feel like it goes too dark, darken all the stuff around it, fill those in more, and then this will probably not look as dark as you originally thought it did. See, I'm using word vase over here on where it's supposed to use the word sphere. That's okay. Again, it doesn't really matter what word you're using. If you want to be really picky about it, you can. Here, I guess I could write the word sphere. I'll definitely misspell that one. There we go. See, I already misspelled that. Again, the word you choose, up to you. You can use different ones. I've had people do kind of like poems in here before, and that's fine as long as the values match with what they're supposed to be. Okay. Again, you can get kind of more messy and overlap things a lot more. You can tell my handwriting's not the best. I'm not super precise about everything. So, some people really fill it in really organized. You can see on the examples I showed. I think the students did a better job of that than I'm doing on this demo. So you can fill it in really precise. You can curve things like I was doing there. Like if the shadow sort of curves, you can curve the word. Again, you can just kind of layer and scribble. You can, like let's say here with box, I can write it sideways. You can almost write it upside down. It doesn't really matter. Okay, just keep using the words and doing those things I talked about. Okay, so I'm gonna leave it here. Again, look at the finished examples on Canvas. And again, this is more about just showing you how to get going, not really to try to show you a finished drawing, because I'm trying to keep the demos less than 30 minutes. So hopefully I did on this one.